Hi there, Dan here with 123 Muse, and in this video we're going to take a look at our Scroll FX widget. And there's a number of things that our Scroll FX widget can do. Here I've got Muse opened with a page that I put together showing some of the basics that you can do with Scroll FX. Let's take a quick look at that. I'm going to preview this page in the browser, and as I scroll down you notice we can bring things in and out on the x-axis. We can move things on the y-axis. We can bring things in and out on the z-axis. Rotate things on the z-axis, the y-axis, and the x-axis. Scale. When we rotate or move something, we can show the back of that thing that we're flipping or rotating. We can nest multiple things together, and it works full width. And not only that, if I go ahead and move this down, now you can take a look. I've resized my browser, and so here I'm in a fluid width site on Muse, and this works inside of that. This is something that the native Adobe Muse Scroll FX widget doesn't do at this time. So here we've got our responsive site that it works on. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this works. I'm going to close Chrome down briefly. I'm going to create a new page. Oh, I've already got one here. And what I've done is on the master of this page, I've just added a grid background so that I can see about where to place things on here. So how do we get something to animate? First of all, we're going to go to our library and take a look for this widget. And here we've got the scroll effects. And there's two parts to this widget. The first part you only need to put once on each page you want to use the scroll effects, and that's the scroll effects loader. So I'm going to put that above the top of the page here, and that just loads the scripts up needed to run this when it's in the browser. The next is the scroll effects instance, and I need to add one of these to each element that I want to animate. Let's see how I connect that now. So I'm going to animate just a basic box. So draw that in the screen. Add some color to it. And now here's the important, probably the most important thing to remember when doing this, is that the item that I'm going to animate needs to have a graphic style name that matches the graphic style name inside this. So this is how we do this. With my box selected, I click on my graphic styles. I click this icon right here, which I'll scroll down to show you, and this will add a new graphic style, and it always adds it as the name style. And then I'm going to double click on that and change the name of that to test. That's just for the purposes of this particular video. Now that I've got this rectangle set up with the graphic style test, now I can go into my Scroll FX instance and match it up. So I'm going to call this test. Okay, so now they're connected. Now my scrolling is connected to my rectangle or whatever the element is that I want to animate. And we've tested this with things such as Adobe's built-in YouTube and Vimeo widget, and Google Maps, and this will animate all of those things. Now my rectangle or the element I want to animate is matched up with this instance of the animation, so now I can go ahead and start entering the parameters of the animation. So first of all, when do I want something to animate? When it's entering the viewport, exiting the viewport, or between entering and exiting the viewport. We're going to start out with, for this one, with entering the viewport. Now, how do I want my scroll boundary to start and end? Well, I'm going to show you something I've put together to give us a better look at this. If I just minimize Muse for a second and open this PSD, I've got a quick setup of how the mechanics of this work. Imagine that our browser is separated into 10 sections. So this grid here, the top of the grid and the bottom of the grid are the top and the bottom of our browser. And in between is 10 slots. So each of these would be 10% of the combined 100% browser height. Now then, if I want to start from the bottom, I want my animation to start when it enters the screen. So imagine this is my element here. I want it to start right about here. So if we can imagine this rectangle here, this is the top of the rectangle. Down here is the bottom, here's the left, and here's the right. And in ours, we've also got top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. So I'm going to want to think about this while I'm setting up my animation. And I want it to start from when the top of my rectangle enters the browser. And it's going to finish animating when the top of it hits the browser. We'll take out the middle one right now. So now let's go back to Muse and see how that's all set up. So I've made a line here, which is just a guideline to show me where I can be safe that this is below the browser line. I'm going to grab my effects and bring it to the front actually. Arrange, bring to front, and I'm going to drop it on here. The reason I like to drop it on the thing that I'm animating is if you've got multiple things on the screen, then you can have your multiple instances specifically attached to the item that you're animating. So let's drop this now below that line. Just put it into the center, and let's take a quick look at those animation settings we've got. So we want it when it's entering the viewport, remember, and we want to move this forward. So you remember those 10 different sections on the PSD? Well, they equate to 10% of the browser. This is where we tell the widget which way we want this to work. So if I want this to run forwards, I'm going to want this to start at 0. So this is the very bottom part of the browser. So at 0% it will start, and it will finish when it gets to 1, which will be 100%. Each different section there between goes up in a decimal point. So 0.1 would be equivalent to 10% of the screen, and 0.2 to 20%, and so forth. And you can put in 2 decimal places so if you want to get more accurate. So this is going to start when it first hits the browser at 0% of the browser and finish at 1, which is 100% of the browser. The next thing is I want this to start rotating when the top of this rectangle first comes onto the screen. So to do that, in the movement section, I'm going to set this starting origin from center. See, I've got a whole bunch of different things that I can set it to. I'm going to start that at top because I want it to start when the top of my element hits there. Now I can move this left and right, up and down, and on the z-axis here by putting a number in here. I can set my easing in and out and have this as linear, ease in, ease out, or ease in and out. Easing just makes a animation look a little more natural and not so jumpy. And for my rotation, I'm going to rotate this on the z-axis 180 degrees. Okay, I'm not going to have any scaling. The back face I don't need to worry about here, and the perspective angle I'm not going to worry about either. So let's take a look at how this works now. I'm going to preview this in the browser. And here we've got our blank screen, and now as I scroll down, you can see at the bottom here, my element is starting to come to the screen. So as soon as that top hits, we can see it is starting to rotate, and it spins around, and it will finish when that top gets to the top of the screen here. So we can see that top is at the top of the box currently, but as it rotates, that top now becomes the bottom of the box. So the animation doesn't finish until that comes up completely up to the top of the screen. So how would we alter that? Well, let's take a look what would change if we switch that to center. So now the animation won't start until the center of the rectangle is on the screen, and it won't finish until that center in the browser's mind, in its programming, is rotated that full 180 degrees. Let's take a look at that in the browser. So I'm going to scroll down, and we see right about here is my browser's saying that must be around about the center of this box, because I can see it just slightly rotating right now. So now it starts its rotation. It's done a full rotation, and even though this looks like my animation has finished, the browser and the programming is saying that it's actually going to be when the center of this is just at the top of the browser. So the center of this rectangle is about here when it's at the top of the browser, and about here when it's at the beginning of the browser. So that's how we get that rotation to work that way. Let's see now how it would affect things if we altered any of the other settings in this animation. So I'm going to actually leave this on center, but I'm going to alter these things here. What would happen if I didn't start my animation till 0.5, which is 50%, till it's come 50% up on the screen? Let's take a look at that. So as I scroll down, it's still there, you see, it hasn't started, and now it starts it and finished. So we can see now by putting 0.5 in there, I've essentially told it that I didn't want that animation to start until that center of that element was at 50% of the browser's height. So that's how that's calculated. Now let me show you a different thing that we can do with this by switching those numbers around. So if I switch these two numbers around, something completely different is going to happen. I've changed this opacity to 0 because I want this to finish on 0 opacity. So I want it to fade out, not fade in. So to do that, I have to switch these two numbers around, which kind of switch the animation backwards. So I'm going to put 1 in here, and I'm going to put 0.5 here. So let's see how this works now. I'm going to preview this in the browser. And now you see that previously my box would have been on the screen and then would have spun around and faded out. But now by switching those numbers around, what I've done is I've made it so that it basically reverses the animation. So now it starts off as no opacity and reverses it so that the opacity comes in rather than going out. So this is very useful because you might want something to kind of animate in. And you can do the same for this for any of the other settings. Let's take a look at one that will really show that working. So I'm going to go into my settings, I'm going to take that rotate off, and I'm going to change the scaling. So initially it's set at 1, and that 1 is 100%. So if I change this to 2, that's going to be 200% scaling. And I'm going to switch this back around, so this will be 0.5. Actually, this will be 0, and this will be 1. Take a look at that, and we can see that I left that opacity. Let me go back and change that opacity back to 1. Okay, so now we can see that as this comes onto the screen, it starts at 100% and then expands to 200% as it goes up the screen. But what if I wanted to do that the other way around? What if I wanted to start it big and go small? I could just switch these numbers around up here. So change that to 1, change this to 0, preview that again in the browser, and now we can see it's reversed the animation. So now it starts at 200 and goes back down. Actually, because this has expanded this by 200%, we can already see the rectangle because it's 200%, so that's made it big enough so that it starts with some of it on the screen. So I'd have to move this down to get this off the screen. So you can see that that works pretty good. Depending on what you want, if you want something to go one way or you want something to go another way, you can reverse the animation, which is especially good for things like opacity. If you want something to appear and disappear, then that's the way to do it. Things that you can do for other things is rather than reversing the animation. For instance, if I wanted to rotate this something 360 degrees, I could do that by typing in here. But if I wanted to reverse it the opposite way, I would just do -360, and that would rotate it the other way. And the same goes for moving things on the X and the Y and the Z axis, is it will move them in and out based on positive or negative numbers. Then let's take a look now at hiding the back face. If I change this scale back down to 1, which is 100%, so I'm going to set now my X rotation to 180 degrees, right around halfway. And so I've set this to 0 and set this to 1 because I want it to come on as a box and then spin. And now what this will do is it's going to come on and it's going to spin 180 degrees. Let's take a look at that. I'm going to close a couple of these down. As I scroll down now, you see my box there, it turns and disappears. And what's happening here is, imagine that there's a front of this element and there's a back of the element. And right now it's set so the back doesn't show. And this is actually helpful because a lot of times you don't want the back to be shown. But if there's a case where you do want it to be showing, instead of it just disappearing like that, what you do is you go into your widget and uncheck Hide Items Backface. Now if we preview that again, as it rotates around, we're actually seeing the back of it. To make this kind of more apparent, I'm going to put some text in it. And I'm just going to increase the size of that text, center it, put a bit of spacing around it. All right, now let's try it. Okay, so now here comes my box, spins around, and now you can see because it's spun around, we're seeing the other side of it, but now it's showing that other side. So if you're animating something and it's spun around and you don't see it, you may need to turn the back face culling off, or if you have got it turned off and you've got something you're like, hey, I don't want to see the back of that, I just want it to disappear, then you would turn that back face culling off. Okay, so that's the basics of how to get these things onto the screen and how to get them animated. And you have to do quite a bit of playing around with this. There's a couple of things that I will let you know about to watch out for. After you've been testing these in the browser for over and over again, you might find that all of a sudden your browser stops having a scrolling bar. And you might go into your preview mode over here, and this stops having a scroll bar as well. And that's got something to do with the scripts running over and over and over again on Adobe Muse's server when it's running the website. So just save your project, close down Muse, open it up again, and voila, your scroll bars will be back there. Another thing that we have found, and it's something that we're looking at as well, is depending on how many instances you have of this on the screen, there is cases where sometimes one of the instances will have some kind of interference with the other, which is just the multiple layers of this of the script and the instances working, and sometimes one works off the other. So you may find that, and I found that generally speaking what I have to do is just adjust the way that the animation is working on one of the instances, because maybe it's got interference from a previous instance. But we haven't noticed that too much. There's a fantastic widget. It works in responsive design and fluid width design. It works with full width elements, and it works on most things that we've tried. We've got it working on. So for instance, it works on when you put a rectangle and put text in it, when you put a fill on that and put an image in that fill, or when you just place an image onto the screen. In the widgets that we have tried it with, that are built into Muse, we've tried it with YouTube widgets and with the Google Maps widget. And as long as you add and match up the graphic style of the element you want to animate to the instance, this is the instance right here, to the instance of the widget, then it seems to work pretty good. We are working on updates for this, and we, as always, love to hear from you guys and things that would be beneficial for your workflow. So any ideas that you have for this widget, we'd be happy to look into. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and that you now have a better understanding of how the basics of our Scroll FX widget works.